So, I'm excited to introduce our speaker so that we can learn about executive function for tweens and teens. If you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll ask them all at the end during our Q&A portion. Before we get started, I do also want to take a moment to announce that the release of our brand new decodable book series for teens is here. So Stories of the Looking Glass is a 10-book series. It is written by LearnUp tutors, specifically written for our struggling teen readers. It features culturally diverse characters and storylines. So we're very excited to have this. We have our ebook versions that are currently available for purchase. So thank you for sharing that link in the chat if you want to all check it out. It's there for you. All right. For anyone who is just joining in, welcome. We do ask that you keep your mics muted during the presentation, but please introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know your name and where you're coming from. I've also got our contact info here on the screen. So we're available by phone or by email. You can also find us at LearnUp Centers on all social media platforms. All right. I am pleased to present Dr. Michela Taylor, joining us from Aspire Therapy Center. Dr. Michela Taylor specializes in ADHD, neurodevelopmental conditions, and twice exceptional profiles. Her approach is warm, thorough, and deeply individualized. Every client receives not just a diagnosis, but a genuine roadmap for their unique mind. She also co-hosts the Strengths and Giggles podcast with Dr. McMullen. Dr. Michela is a psychologist with Aspire Therapy Center, which is a multidisciplinary mental health practice serving individuals and families throughout California and Florida. They provide compassionate, evidence-based therapy, comprehensive psychological and psychoeducational assessments, and executive functioning coaching for children, teens, and adults. Now, I am going to go ahead and pass that on to you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here and having me. I am recovering from a little bit of a cold, so my voice should be okay. I have some lozenges, so I apologize if I have to mute and just cough, or take a sip of water. I will want to begin with a situation that may feel familiar. A student finishes an assignment, puts in their backpack, puts it in their backpack, carries it all the way to school, and doesn't turn it in. The parent thinks, we did the work. How did this not make it to the teacher? The teacher thinks, I reminded class 3 times, and the student may genuinely have no satisfying explanation beyond, I forgot. That gap between having the ability, knowing the expectation, and carrying it through is where executive functioning lives. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to be looking at what executive functions are, why they are especially inconsistent in tweens and teens, and what adults can do that is more effective than repeating ourselves or rescuing at the last minute or assuming a child simply does not care. So this is not a talk about lowering expectations. It is about understanding the skills underneath those expectations so that we can help young people meet them more independently. And that capable but inconsistent child is really the focus of our conversation tonight. Next slide. So we're going to begin with a shared definition of what executive functioning is and a quick look at the developing adolescent brain. And then we're going to move into 5 places where executive function challenges show up most often. And that's attention, memory, organization, procrastination, and time management. And for each one, I will do 3 things. I'll explain what the skill actually requires, show how the same difficulty can look different at home and at school, and offer strategies that adults can use right away. You will probably recognize one child in several sections. That's expected. These skills overlap, and one visible behavior can have more than one cause. And my goal is not for you to diagnose a child from a slide. It is to help you become more curious and precise about what may be getting in the way. Um, so before we talk about backpacks, blank pages, and missed deadlines, let's define the system behind all of it. Next slide. So, what is executive function? Executive functions are the brain's management skills. They help us choose a goal, decide what matters now, hold relevant information in mind, resist distractions that come up, and adjust when the plan changes. So, you can think of them as the processes that organize our other abilities. A student may have the vocabulary to write an excellent essay, understand a math concept, and care about the grade. Executive functioning is what helps the student open the document, decide where to begin, stay with the task, and submit it in the correct place. That is why I often describe executive functioning as the bridge between knowing and doing. When a child can tell you exactly what they should have done, we as adults can sometimes hear that as proof that the child chose not to do it. But knowing the rule and executing the rule are different demands. The air traffic control metaphor helps make this visible. So imagine that all day long, planes are arriving, those planes being instructions, assignments, emotions, text messages, noises, ideas, hunger, worries, impulses. The controller has to decide which plane lands now, which one waits, and which one needs to be redirected. The controller also has to keep the original goal in view when something more interesting suddenly enters the airspace. So for tweens and teens, the tower is operational, but the controller is still learning. So at the same time, the airport is getting busier, right? Middle school and high school brings more teachers, longer assignments, changing schedules, more social demands, and much greater expectations for independence. And the workload can increase faster than the management system develops. So that is why this conversation matters. Executive functioning skills are strongly connected to how young people manage school, relationships, and responsibilities, and then eventually adult life. So a child can be highly intelligent and completely understand the material, but still struggle to use that ability consistently. For many struggling students, the obstacle isn't whether they are smart enough, it's whether they can organize, direct, and apply what they know when they need it. We often organize that management system around three core skills. Next slide. So the first is working memory, which is the ability to hold information in mind while doing something with it. The second is inhibitory control. That's the ability to pause an automatic response or resist a distraction. And then the third is cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift strategies or adapt when circumstances change. To see how quickly these combine, picture a typical school morning. A tween is told, put your lunch in your backpack, grab your water bottle, and meet me by the door. Working memory holds those three steps. Inhibitory control helps them walk past the phone notification. Cognitive flexibility helps when the usual water bottle is missing and they need to choose another one rather than getting stuck. If any of those systems drop, the adult sees a child who is still upstairs without shoes on while everyone else is waiting in the car. The important point is that the behavior we see at the end, lateness or incomplete work or frustration, that may be the product of several invisible skills working together. And that is why simply saying be more responsible is usually too vague to teach anything. And those skills do not develop in a straight, predictable line. Next slide. So the prefrontal cortex that supports planning, inhibition, and decision making continue developing through adolescence and into young adulthood. You'll often hear age 25 used as shorthand, and it's useful as a reminder that development continues well beyond high school. And it's not a magical birthday when the brain suddenly becomes finished. It does vary between like 25, 20 to 28. And development is also uneven. A teen may reason very well in a calm conversation and make a very difficult, I mean, sorry, make a very different choice when they are tired, embarrassed, excited with their peers, or facing an immediate reward. Being able to demonstrate a skill once does not mean they can access it consistently under every condition. So this is the developmental mismatch highlighted on the slide. Systems involved in emotion, reward, and social sensitivity become highly active during adolescence, while cognitive control systems are still becoming more efficient. One simple metaphor is a car with a powerful accelerator and brakes that are still being refined. While that explanation may increase empathy, it does not mean anything goes. Developmental context is not an excuse from expectation. It tells us how to teach toward them. We can hold the boundary and still ask what support will make success more likely next time. For example, if a 13-year-old repeatedly forgets sports equipment, the choice is not between delivering it every day and letting them fail indefinitely. We might create a visual checklist by the door or practice packing at a consistent time and gradually reduce reminders once the routine is established. Some good language to use instead of "you are old enough to remember this is your responsibility. Let's build a system that helps you handle it without me reminding you." I also want to mention that executive function difficulties are not the only possible explanation for inconsistent performance. Sleep problems, anxiety, depression, learning difficulties, stress, ADHD can all affect these skills. So we look at patterns across time and settings rather than interpreting one behavior in isolation. But with that developmental lens in place, let's look at the 5 day-to-day domains. Next slide. So these 5 areas make executive functioning easier to observe. Attention, working memory, organization, procrastination, and time management. They overlap. A missing assignment could reflect organization. The student couldn't find it. It could reflect working memory. The student forgot it existed. It could reflect procrastination. The student avoided starting. Or it could reflect time management. The student misjudged how long it would take. So before choosing a strategy, we want to ask a better question than "why didn't you do it?" That question often produces "I don't know." Instead, we can reconstruct the point where the process broke down. Did you know what the task was? Could you find the materials? Did you know the first step? Did you have a realistic plan for when to do it? What happened when you tried to begin? And some more language to use could be, let's figure out where the plan stopped working. Um, that can be more useful than "why didn't you do what you were supposed to do?" So let's start with the domain people usually think of first, which is attention. Next slide. So attention is the ability to focus on what matters, filter what does not, and sustain effort long enough to reach a goal. And notice that the definition I used is not sitting perfectly still or looking at the speaker. Attention is about whether the relevant information is being selected and used. And that distinction matters because attention is much more than an on-off switch. Next slide. We often talk about attention as if a child either has it or does not. In reality, attention changes with the task, the environment, the child's emotional state, and the amount of stimulation available. Sustained attention is staying with something over time. Selective attention is filtering competing information. And divided attention is attempting to manage more than one stream of information. Although for many complex tasks, what feels like multitasking is really rapid switching, and switching has a cost. So this helps explain a common parent question. How can they focus on a game for 2 hours, but not a worksheet for 10 minutes? The ability to focus intensely on a highly stimulating or rewarding activity does not prove that attention is equally available for a repetitive delayed reward task. Interest, novelty, immediate feedback, and clear goals are all make attention easier to recruit. So the more useful question is not "can this child ever focus?" It is "under what conditions can this child focus and what changes when the task is less rewarding?" Um, so when attention breaks down, the behavior can look very different depending on the setting. Next slide. At home, a child may open the laptop for homework, notice a message, search for something unrelated, and realize 20 minutes later that the assignment is still untouched. At school, the same child may miss a direction because a classmate moved, the hallway was noisy, or their own thought pulled them away. One of the most important clues is inconsistency. They may attend well one-on-one, but struggle in a busy group or focus in first period, but not after lunch. That does not make the difficulty fake. It tells us that context matters. So also remembering that a parent inattention can have different causes. A student who is staring out the window may be distracted, confused, anxious, tired, or already lost. And before redirecting, it can help to briefly check. Tell me what step you're on. That gives us more information than, pay attention. And some more language instead of like focus or pay attention. We could try like for the next 5 minutes, your job is to complete questions 1 and 2. I'll check back when this timer ends, right? So giving them a little bit more instruction. The best attention supports make the target clearer and competing demands weaker. Next slide. So at home, we can begin by making the work period specific. Do your homework is broad and open-ended. Put your phone in the kitchen, open the science assignment, and work until the 15-minute timer ends. Gives the brain a target. Short, focused sprints are useful because they make effort feel finite, and the length of time that they're forced to do something or asked to do something should match the child, right? 15 minutes is just an example. It's not a rule. So a child who currently manages 5 focused minutes is not helped by being asked, sorry, is not helped by being assigned a 30-minute sprint and failing. Body doubling can also be helpful. This is where you quietly work near another person. This can provide an anchor without the adult sort of taking over. An adult might answer emails or fold laundry while the student works. And the message is more, I'm available and we are both in work mode, and not I'm watching every move you make. And when you can, inject novelty, right? Like have them write with a colored pen or have them stand or do jumping jacks before they do something, or do a beat the timer challenge. In the classroom, it helps to make the structure of work visible. So post the task sequence and time expectations, break longer assignments into clear checkpoints, and use brief private check-ins, such as what are you working on right now and what comes next, as opposed to like calling them out publicly in front of everyone. During longer lectures, build in short opportunities for students to actively process the material. So they can annotate a passage or respond to a question, compare notes, or write a brief takeaway, rather than expecting sustained passive attention. And when appropriate, flexible seating, standing at the back of the room, discrete fidgets, brief movement breaks can also support attention, as long as they genuinely approve the student's engagement and work in the classroom, that you're running. Most importantly, measure whether the strategy helps. A fidget is a support if the student is more available for instruction, not simply because it's labeled as an accommodation. Next slide. So working memory is our mental workspace. It's the information we hold temporarily while we use it. So the brain's mental sticky note. I also think of it as a very small desk. When too much gets piled on, something slides off. And importantly, this is not the same as whether a child has a good long-term memory. Next slide. So a student may remember detailed facts about a favorite topic and still lose the second half of a direction. Long-term knowledge and working memory are different systems. So working memory is brief and limited. It is used when we hold the beginning of a sentence while reading the end, keep track of steps in mental math, remember what the teacher asked while locating the correct worksheet, or organizing an idea long enough to put it into words. Working memory does not live in one isolated part of the brain. It depends on the prefrontal cortex coordinating with other regions, including parietal areas, to keep relevant information active while we use it. When the demand exceeds capacity, information is not necessarily ignored. It may simply drop out. Stress makes this even harder. Think about trying to remember complicated directions while you're already late and someone is frustrated with you. The emotional load occupies some of the same limited workspace. And this is why adding more verbal explanation can backfire. When a child looks confused, adults often respond by talking longer. If working memory is the barrier, then more language creates more material to hold. Next slide. So at home, the child completes the first part of a direction and appears to ignore the rest. At school, they may begin a multi-step problem correctly and then lose track of what they were solving. In writing, they may have an idea but forget it while trying to spell or punctuate or structure a sentence. Repeatedly asking, "What did I just say?" Can turn a capacity problem into a shame-filled memory test. A better check is neutral and practical. Like, what is the first step? If they can't tell you, restate one step and make it visible. It is also useful to notice when performance improves with written directions, examples, or reference sheets. That improvement is information. It suggests that reducing the memory load allows the student to show what they know. Reminding students you do not have to hold all of this in your head. Let's put the steps somewhere you can see them. It can be helpful. Next slide. For parents, giving fewer steps at a time and use repeat back as a planning tool, not a gotcha. So you might say, "Tell me the first thing you're going to do," rather than asking child to recite a long list perfectly. Use visual supports at the point of performance. So a morning checklist is most useful where the morning routine happens. A sticky note reminding someone to bring lunch is more effective on the door than inside a planner that they forget to open. For educators, pair spoken and written directions, provide worked examples, and reduce unnecessary copying. Copying a complex problem from the board may consume the working memory the student needs to actually solve it. So if they don't have to copy, provide them with the written material. Reference sheets are not automatically giving away the answer. If the learning goal is analysis, we do not necessarily need recall of every small step to block the student from demonstrating analysis. Um, some good thing rather than saying you should know the routine by now, point to the posted routine and ask which step are you on or what part of this, broke down for you, where did you get lost? And over time prompt the student to locate the support independently. Once information and materials leave our immediate view, another executive function becomes essential: organization. Next slide. So organization is not simply neatness. It is the ability to create and maintain systems that allow materials, information, and ideas to be found and used when needed. A visually messy desk can sometimes function for a student, while a beautiful color-coded binder can fail if the student never uses it. The measure of an organization system is whether it works. That system is both has that system has both a physical side and a thinking side. Next slide. So material organization includes backpacks, papers, digital files, and supplies, where cognitive organization includes sequencing and explanation, grouping ideas together, and planning the parts of a project. Both require a mental map. Where does this belong? Where will I need it again? What should happen to it next? Those are all future-oriented questions, which are especially difficult when executive functioning is still developing. Adults sometimes create systems based on what looks orderly to us, rather than what the child can maintain. A 7-folder system is not better than one folder if papers still end up loose in the backpack. The most effective system is often the one with the least friction. So fewer categories, fewer decisions, a consistent location, and a routine time to reset. If a student never files papers by subject, but reliably places everything in one to process folder, that single folder may be the bridge to a later weekly sort. Start with the system that the student can actually use and is gravitating towards already. When there is no reliable system, we see the same frustrating patterns again and again. Next slide. So the black hole backpack is the obvious example, but organization difficulties are not always visible. A student's physical materials may look fine while their digital world contains files named document one, final, and final new. At school, completed work that is never submitted is a classic sign that completion and turn in have sorry, let me back up. At school, completed work that is never submitted is a classic sign that completion and turn in have not been linked into one routine. In writing, disorganized ideas may show up as a student who knows a great deal but produces an essay that jumps from point to point. Before concluding that a student is careless, ask where the process breaks. Was the assignment recorded? Was there a place for the paper? Was there a cue to submit it? Could the student locate the digital link? Some good language to use here is like, show me the path this assignment takes from finished to submitted, if that, going back to my first example when we started. So organization improves when we design that path deliberately. Next slide. At home, create visible homes for high frequency items and schedule short resets. So a 5-minute backpack reset every afternoon is more realistic than waiting for a monthly excavation. Build the system with the child, ask what they lose, where they naturally drop things, and how many categories they can realistically manage. Then practice the system at calm times. For educators, keep assignment locations and submission procedures as consistent as possible. If students must check one platform for directions, another for attachments, and a third to submit, the system itself creates executive load. Teach organization explicitly. Show what a completed planner entry looks like. Model how to name a file, break an essay into sections, or check that an attachment uploaded. We often assess these behaviors without ever teaching the component steps. Then scaffold and fade. The adult may initially walk through the reset with the student, then use a checklist, then give one prompt, and eventually only review the outcome. A good scenario would be like week one, the adult and the student clean the backpack together using 3 categories. Week two, the student sorts while the adult points to the checklist. Week three, student completes the reset and asks the adult for a 2-minute review. And then week four, the adult checks only if the student reports a problem. A child can have the materials, understand the task, and still be unable to cross the starting line. And that brings us to procrastination. Next slide. So procrastination is delaying a task despite knowing that the delay will have a cost. It is often less about not caring and more about difficulty tolerating the feeling associated with beginning. And that is why better calendars alone do not always solve it. Next slide. Procrastination often works as a short-term mood repair. The assignment evokes boredom, uncertainty, anxiety, fear of failure, and avoiding it brings immediate relief. So the brain learns that avoidance works, at least for the next few minutes. This is especially powerful when the reward for doing the task is distant, but the reward for avoiding it is immediate. Scrolling feels better now, starting the paper may help next week. Perfectionism can also look like procrastination. A student may say, I work better under pressure, but pressure may be the only thing strong enough to override the fear of starting imperfectly. The last minute rush also protects the student from fully testing their ability. If the result is disappointing, they can blame the time limit rather than risk believing they were not capable. And task initiation in its own skill. So motivation does not always arrive before action. Often a tiny amount of action creates the clarity or momentum that motivation could not. I mean, motivation is very fickle. When is it ever really there? So an example of this could be a student opens the blank document, feels unsure how to begin, then decides to reorganize their desk first. The desk cleaning feels productive, and looks productive, but it is functioning as escape from the more emotionally difficult tasks. Um, and some language to use instead of, you had all week, why did you wait? You could try what feeling or question shows up when you think about starting. So if we look only at the delay, we miss the moment where help is most useful. Next slide. At home, procrastination may look like I'll do it later, repeated negotiations, or suddenly volunteering for an easier chore. And at school, it can look like staring at the blank page, sharpening a pencil repeatedly, or avoiding the subject in which the student feels least competent. The behavior may also cycle. The adult reminds, the child feels criticized, the task becomes more emotionally loaded, and the avoidance increases. The adult then increases pressure because the child still has not started. So breaking that cycle does not mean removing the tasks. It means lowering the barrier to entry so the student can engage with it. So ask if starting is the problem, what would make the first 2 minutes easier? Possible answers might include like choosing a topic together, opening the document, reading the prompt aloud, or writing an intentionally rough first sentence. The first target is not finishing, it is successful initiation. Slide. So for parents, shrink the start means defining an action so small that the brain has less to resist. So open the assignment, write the heading, write the title, choose one problem, or work for 2 minutes. Lead with curiosity rather than shame because curiosity gathers information and shame usually increases the emotion the child is already trying to avoid. You can still be direct, right? Like the assignment needs to be done. Let's identify what is making the start hard. Co-working can help a student cross the activation barrier as well. Sit nearby for the first 5 minutes, ask them to tell you the first step, and then step away once momentum builds. For educators, create intermediate checkpoints before the final deadline. A due date for the topic, outline, first paragraph, and revision turns one distant demand into several visible starts. Starter templates and sentence stems reduce uncertainty without completing the thinking for the student. Praise the behavior you want to grow. You began even though you felt unsure, is more instructive than praising only the final grade. You can also tell them, you don't have to feel ready to do the whole project. You only need a next action, right? Sometimes it feels very looming if there's like a whole big project or essay to do. Procrastination and time management often travel together, but time management adds another challenge, accurately sensing and planning time. Next slide. So time management includes noticing time passing, estimating duration, prioritizing, and working backward from a future deadline. It is not simply owning a planner. A planner can store a date, but it cannot make that date feel real. Next slide. Some young people experience time primarily as now and not now. If a project is due in 3 weeks, it belongs to not now until the deadline suddenly enters the present. Time estimation is also learned through feedback. If a child routinely assumes getting ready takes 10 minutes, but no one ever compares the estimate with reality. The internal model does not improve. The phrase time blindness is often used, particularly in discussions of ADHD, to describe difficulty sensing time passing or accurately estimating duration. It is a useful description, but it's not a diagnosis on its own, and timing difficulties are not unique to ADHD. Planning backward is demanding because the student must imagine a future outcome, identify all the steps, estimate each step, and place them on a calendar while accounting for other obligations. And we often see one deadline, right? The student's brain is being asked to perform a sequence of executive tasks. So an example, the project is due Friday, feels like one piece of information. A usable plan may require finish research Monday, outline Tuesday, draft Wednesday, revise Thursday, submit Friday, plus deciding when each step fits around practice or extracurriculars or other homework. Without that external plan, the deadline can remain invisible until it becomes an emergency. There's like that running joke where they come to you for the project board the night before, and no one has any project board, and you have to go to Walgreens at 9 p.m. Next slide. Yeah, okay. At home, difficulty sensing time may look like genuine surprise at 45 minutes past while gaming or being chronically late despite sincerely intending to be ready. At school, a student may devote 25 minutes to the first question on a test and have no time for the rest, or underestimate a project because they count only the writing and forget research, setup, revisions, and submission. When several tasks compete, prioritization adds another layer. Many students choose the easiest task, the most interesting task, or the task due first, even when a larger project needs to begin sooner. So time has to become visible before it can be managed. Next slide. So we can use clocks, visual timers, countdowns, and posted agendas to represent time outside the child's head. Give transition warnings that contain an action. 10 minutes until we leave, finish this round and put on your shoes. Turn estimation into a neutral experiment. Ask, how long do you think this will take? Record the estimate, time the task, and compare. The goal is calibration, not catching the child being wrong. For longer assignments, plan backward together. Begin with the deadline, identify the final product, list the steps, estimate them, and place them on actual days. Include buffer time because plans rarely unfold perfectly. At school, show students how much time is available for each portion of a work period. A visual agenda such as 5 minutes of directions, 15 minutes independent work, 5 minutes of review helps students pace themselves. As with every support, fade gradually. Move from adult created reminders to shared planning to student created reminders that the adult briefly reviews. A scenario could be you estimated 15 minutes, it took 28. That's useful data. What part took longer than expected? And what estimate should we use next time? This is where you can kind of get some good information too, like, oh, I got distracted. Oh, my phone went off. Or, they would hopefully tell you what's going on, why it took them so long. Although the 5 demands look different, the most effective supports follow the same principles. Next slide. First, externalize if a demand is invisible, a future date, a sequence of steps, a passing block of time. Put it into the environment with a checklist, a calendar, model, or timer. Second, scaffold, then fade. Scaffolding is temporary support that allows the learner to do something they could not yet do independently. If we remove it too early, the child repeatedly fails. If we never fade it, the adult becomes the executive function system. The goal is supported independence. Third, think skill before will. That does not mean behavior never involves choice or that consequences are never appropriate. It means we first ask whether the child has the necessary skill and can access it under these conditions. Fourth, regulate first. Stress consumes attention and working memory. When a child is flooded with emotion, a lecture about organization is unlikely to land. Calm the interaction, reduce the immediate emotional intensity, and problem solve later. Fifth, partner up. Parents and educators do not need identical systems, but shared language helps. What is your next step works better when the student hears it as a familiar problem solving cue rather than a criticism. Finally, be patient and look for growth in small units. Success may first look like starting after one prompt instead of five, checking the planner with support, or recovering from a missed deadline more quickly. Those are meaningful changes. Some useful questions to use across all the domains is, what is the goal? What is the next visible action? And what support can we use now and reduce later? Next slide. So some key takeaways. Executive functioning is the management system that turns goals and knowledge into action. And that system is still developing for our adolescents, and it goes into young adulthood. The five domains give us a practical way to find the breakdown. When you catch yourself thinking they just won't, pause and consider, what if they can't do this consistently yet? That small change opens the door to a more useful response. Then use the same basic formula. Make the demand visible, reduce the size or emotional weight of the first step, support the child through early success, and gradually hand responsibility back. And small supports used consistently are more powerful than an elaborate system used for 3 days. Choose one recurring problem, identify the likely skill, and test one strategy long enough to learn from it.